Recorder is on. Okay, we are live. We are recording. We are good to go. Welcome, folks. Thank you guys for joining us here. This is our second Operation Ally meeting. We're going to be talking about the material that we discovered the first time, maybe presented a little differently. But if you have questions, then please remember to ask those questions. And if you need further elaboration, or if you were here the last time and maybe you've been thinking about some things and want to supplement some things, make sure to drop those comments in as well, and we'll make sure to get that space. This is our agenda. It will be a pretty full agenda. The goal is to be done by 7. And so we're going to kind of move pretty efficiently. But I do want to make sure that we are clear about one thing. I want to make it evident that we're in this for the long haul. Okay, so this isn't just me telling you, here's what you could do in the next 2 weeks to feel better about yourself, and then you can go back to normal. Okay, like we have an actual plan and strategy that we want to have laid out, and we want to develop a long-term approach to the change. Okay, so the plan is for me to give you a foundational understanding of some of the things that we're actually going to be going into more detail in the future presentations. Okay, so now, again, you're going to hear quite a bit of information. Don't worry about that. What we want you worrying on are our future steps or our next steps, and just understand that we have a lot of this stuff planned out for you. Oh, and I actually see Dr. Meek there. Hey, Dr. Meek, that's my dissertation chair. So quite honestly, you're going to hear a lot of what you taught me, because this is basically what I learned from you, collaborative governance. Okay, so if I get anything screwed up, I got the professional man right there. You want to know about him, look him up on Google Scholar. That guy is amazing. Okay, so that's that. We're going to start with basically introductions. My name is Thomas Allison. I'm an attorney, president of the Social Justice Advocacy Project. And that's really why I'm here. I am an assistant professor at the University of Laverne, where I've actually been teaching for the last 6 years, but in my role as the assistant professor just the last year, and I teach in legal studies. Jason?
Yeah, so my name is Jason Purvis. I am a businessman. I lead a organization of financial advisors in Ontario for Prudential Advisors. But I am here as a community member, as a leader. I've in the past held roles as a pastor, both in the youth and senior pastor role. I'm a family man, and I'm a Black man in America who has been living with the realities of our world surrounding us. And as we think about this idea of problem framing and a definition of allyship and what we're here to do today, the thing that I really want to get across for you guys is, this is not a pep rally. This is not an opportunity. I think back to the times I was an athlete through high school and college. I still consider myself an athlete. I went to the University of Laverne, played football there. And, what would happen on Fridays in high school is we would have a big rally, and everybody would cheer and everybody would get excited, and we would chant things back and forth to one another. And everybody was so unified and strengthened, and everybody was hyped up. We, the football team, were there on the stage, and, everybody was chanting and cheering for us, and the fans were in the stands, and we all had that same energy in that room. And then about 4 hours later, I went out with my teammates and got beaten and bruised in a battle. And what we're asking for today, and what the intent of this group is not to have another pep rally where we gather people to cheer and chant and walk with us and protest with us. All those things are necessary, yes. But this is about taking that next step and say, I'm ready to step out of the stands and get onto the field and do battle alongside my brothers and sisters who have been waging this war for their own humanity for decades and centuries even. So today is not a pep rally, it's the equipment room. we're going to equip you with a lot of ideas and tools, both on the practical and on the policy side of how we can actually make change within our community. And if you can find that mute button, if you are just joining us, please find that mute button. That would be greatly appreciated. So today is about finding true change and becoming an ally rather than just a supporter. Because I have a ton of friends and family and people who support the work, and they're the ones that are cheering. They're the ones that are giving us that energy and that excitement, and that's fantastic. We need that too. But this group is about becoming an ally and partnering and going on to the battle. And yes, sometimes taking some bruises and bumps along the way, but willingly choosing to do that because the cause is worth it. So what I would really encourage you to do as we wrap up this kind of formal introduction is make sure you have a pen and a paper. And when you do that, make sure it's not one of those papers that you just snag off of the side of the desk or something, but it's something you're going to be able to keep and reference back to, because this is going to become part of your toolbook and your equipment as you move forward. So Thomas, I think you were going to have a little bit more of a formal definition of the problem and what active allyship looks like.
Right. So right now we're in the middle of what is really being coined the Black Lives Matter movement, and everybody is rallying around this. But we want to make sure that we take a broader, more systemic approach to this, because I think if you actually do the research and you start to understand how the system works and why Black Lives Matter is a thing, you start to understand that it's not just a race issue. At the heart of our problems are really economics. And we see that poor white people, a lot of them have the same narrative as poor Black people. And so the difference, though, is that the Black community has been systemically denied nationhood, systemically denied access to our roots, to our history, and that has put us in a unique situation where socially we are the only group in America that do not have a nation. We don't have shared principles. We don't have the shared identity that a lot of people with national identities do, even immigrants. And because of that, it socially has placed us almost as the lowest common denominator. And so if you fight for Black lives and you get to the point where Black lives actually matter in this society, then what you've then realized is that everyone now has a little bit more equality. Everyone has a little bit more freedom. So our goal is not just to take this as a race issue, because that would mean that if we got rid of all racism, then everything in society would be exactly the way we want it. And that's not the case either. Okay, so if we take a collective approach to this, and I think we start to begin to understand where the systemic issues are that impact probably people in your family, whether you're Black, white, Hispanic, Latino, whatever. And that being said, we want to make sure that we understand that active allyship is different from false generosity. False generosity is you're being willing to give up time and willing to donate, but you want to keep the system largely intact that provides you the privilege to give up the time and the donation. Active allyship means we are dismantling the system that provides you any unfair privilege, okay? We're going straight to sexism, racism, all of it. If you get an unearned privilege in society and you're not willing to give that up for everybody to have equal access to opportunity and privilege, then we're not talking about active allyship. We're talking about false generosity, which is not as deep as what we're going as far as commitment-wise in our approach to this. So that really is the framing, is we recognize that this problem disproportionately impacts Black people statistically. The Black community works just as hard as other communities, yet we suffer greater disproportionate health outcomes, negative health outcomes, incarceration, poverty, and poor education outcomes because of systemic discrimination. So if we're only talking about police, then we're not actually getting to the issue of Black lives actually mattering, because it's not just the police. The police is just a portion, it's a symptom really of the greater disease, which is the systemic discrimination and oppression. Anything you want to add to that, Jason?
Thomas, did you toss that over to me?
Yeah, I said anything you want
Okay.
to add to that?
No, I think that was a great definition of allyship and the problem and the issue. One thing that I might dovetail off of it, and just because I've seen some concern and confusion surrounding the idea and the notion of Black Lives Matter as a statement versus Black Lives Matter as a movement, and everything that the institution or the organization Black Lives Matter, what that stands for. And we have not, as Operation Ally, made a statement as to the organization as a whole. However, the words Black Lives Matter, every person should be able to support. And that's what we're speaking out towards at the moment. So for those of you who may think like, well, I don't know if I want to be involved with this organization, if they're going to start saying Black Lives Matter, let's just set that aside for the moment, because that's not the issue at hand. The issue at hand is the question, do Black lives actually matter in America? And how do we create an environment where we can resolve the issues that are showing us that they're not mattering to the same degree as other lives do? So I just want to put that out there, because I've got some questions surrounding that, and I've seen some other posts surrounding that. Let's just set that aside for tonight, because I think there's so much more valuable information we can have just by engaging in this conversation at an introductory level. So with that, should we just jump forward into the social engagement, Thomas?
That works for me.
Perfect. So let's talk about, we're going to handle two things here tonight, and we're going to talk broadly on how we can assist the situation within the Black community through our own personal social engagement. And then we're going to move on to how we can work through change through policy and some practical steps on that side. So the first thing I want to say is when it comes to the social engagement, this is where I'm talking about how you interact with your friends, your family, how you interact on Facebook. And we're going to talk about how do we stand up for justice in this time, because the reality is so many of you are here in this group. The reason why we started Operation Ally is through Thomas and I's conversations with our friends, because we both have, excuse me, very diverse group of friends, and people have reached out to us after seeing what happened with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, just the most recent three. We all know we could go on and list name after name after name. Unfortunately, that's become the reality in America, that there's a roll call of Black lives that have not been, or that have been unjustly snuffed out far too early. And we had people reaching out to us saying, how can I help? What can I do? And so we decided to put together a forum of people. And for those of you who weren't a part of the forum, if this is your first time being introduced to us, 180 people were on earlier in the week. So this is definitely a movement. And that was with 4 days of promotion and outreach. So this is certainly something that a lot of people are beginning to rise up to and want to do more than just march and protest, but want to take actions to have real things change. So many of you are here because you've come to the point where you're more uncomfortable in your silence than you will be uncomfortable with the repercussions of standing up for injustice. So that really is the decision that you have after today's information is given to you. You can be uncomfortable in your silence because you realize that something's wrong, something needs to change. I should be making some steps for something to be better. Or you can be uncomfortable while you stand up for injustice, and you can be on the right side of history when all of this changes. I mean, we look back at the civil rights movement through Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and what he did. And there were people who were very uncomfortable with the situation, but they weren't so uncomfortable that they were willing to speak up. And it wasn't until after the movement had taken hold of being popular enough that people finally began to jump on board. And you can choose tonight to become a person who's going to be seen on the right side of history. So let's just jump into this from the how do I handle things with my friends, my family, social media, things like that. And the first thing I want to say is, does social media even change hearts? Does it work? Like, if I utilize my social media platform to speak out against injustice, is it going to do anything? Well, I have 3 friends that actually I've seen them recant former statements. One of my friends is a former, well, you don't say former Marine, but he's a Marine who's no longer enlisted. And you look back 4 years ago to the all of the unrest surrounding Colin Kaepernick and his protests of police brutality being really hijacked into something that was about the flag, and so many people stood against what Colin Kaepernick was doing and how he could disrespect our nation and everything like that. And this individual and I had some really good conversations about social injustice, and he stood with me on many points. But when it came to Colin Kaepernick and kneeling during the national anthem in protest against police brutality, he said, no, I've seen people die on a battlefield for that flag and for the right to kneel, and I'm not for that. I won't support it. Well, just recently in the last week and a half, as he has continued to just uncover how much true injustice has been done in the Black community, he posted and shared a post that has been shared by many people, whether military or not, that starts off, "Sorry, Cap. 4 years ago, I discredited you. I didn't believe you. I dismantled your argument. I spoke adamantly against you. And perhaps if I had listened to you 4 years ago, we wouldn't be here again today." And it's a much longer post, worded way better than I just summarized it. But you understand the idea that 4 years later, a conversation that I had with him still remains, or it was pivotal. I'm not saying that I'm the person who changed his mind, but I can look back at that conversation that I had with him and recognize that there's growth and there's progress and people are beginning to speak out. So your social media helps people know where you stand. And that's kind of what we see here is that the reality is, sometimes people don't know what to say. So what do I do then? What if I don't know what to say? So let me give you, just from a Black man, a leader within the Black community, if you don't know what to say, just let your words stand alone with no qualifiers, no apologies, and no other issues in that post. And what I mean in that is, so often people are reaching out to say, hey, I'm with you, I support you, I do want Black Lives to Matter, I see the change, I also support XYZ, I also support 1, 2, 3. And what that does for me and for many others is it waters down the impact of your support. Because I don't feel like I can be supported unless you publicly, separate yourself from anybody that might possibly think that you could only support Black lives, which is absolutely not the point. We just want to hear, it's like saying, I'm sorry, but, right? If you've ever been in an argument with someone and they're like, oh, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but you really shouldn't have. Well, it just pretty much washes away the entire statement prior. And one of the things that has been vocalized as I have shared with people is, this idea has come about where we've seen these posts that say silence is betrayal. And that is rooted in a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And what that quote says is that in the end, it is not the words of our enemies that we will remember, but the silence of our friends. And so, that long wordy statement has been summarized in a tweetable moment of silence is betrayal. And what I put out on my social media, because I had several friends saying, Jason, I'm not being silent, I just don't know what to say. I don't know how to voice myself. And I don't want to hurt you, and I don't want to hurt my friends who are cops, and I don't want to hurt my grandma who's, this political party, and my uncle who's that political party. So I just don't know what to say, so I don't say anything. And I've understood where they're coming from, and I understand that social media isn't the end-all, be-all of the representation of people's lives or their beliefs. However, what I have come to embrace as a reality, and what I've tried to share with my very well-meaning friends is, you know, friend, your silence may not be betrayal, but your words are healing. Your silence may not be betrayal, but your words are healing. And so what you're doing by staying silent is you are removing the ability to use your words to heal a hurting nation and a hurting people. Because what's happening, and I've actually heard this now from several other Black leaders that I've not had any contact with, and I don't know, or I have no reason to believe that they've seen my message, but I've heard the same idea that, you know, I'm waiting. In fact, Bishop Kenneth Ulmer, the pastor of a church, a very large church in Los Angeles, put out a message of, you know, that his tagline was "Someone ought to say something," and that was directed. And he says it. They're his words. The white Christian evangelical church isn't saying anything, and someone ought to say something, because I'm looking for my friends who have told me they support me, and I don't see it. You've asked me to stand on your stage and preach at conferences, and we pray together, and we do all this stuff, but I don't see the support today. Where are you at? And so your voices of support matter to us, and we long to hear that. It's healing to our soul. So if you don't know what to say, just say simply this: to my Black friends, I don't know what to say. I see you're hurting. I'm sorry for any part that I may have played. I'm trying to move forward. I'm trying to partner with you better. And leave it alone. Don't say, I also stand against this and I also stand against that, because all that does is it strips away the potency of what you just said. So then the next question is, will my voice even matter? Will it matter if I say anything? Well, I have 10 followers on Facebook. It's just my family and my 2 work colleagues. Well, guess what? You speak to those family and 2 work colleagues, they may not be connected to Thomas or I or any other Black person for that matter, not in a real personal way. So you speak into a place where we cannot, and your voice carries a weight that even if I were to get in front of those people, if Thomas were to get in front of those people, we would not have the same weight, because they have no relationship with us, and we just seem like another Black person who's crying and whining about the system and not pulling himself up by their own bootstraps. And you know, nothing could be further from the truth for either Thomas or I. Neither one of us were born with a silver spoon, and we very much have done exactly that and pulled ourselves up. I don't like the term. I'm not going to get into all that right now. But the point is, you speak to a people that will not receive the message the same from me. So when you begin to speak out, people hear it in a way that I won't. Also remember that many of your friends and family and people that you do have influence over, they are today where you were 1 week ago, thinking, you know, I want to say something, but I don't quite know how to say it. I don't know how I'm going to be received, so I'm just going to sit back in silence. What we need is for people to begin to be willing to speak out and be brave about what they're going to say and be bold about what they're going to say and be determined, not watering it down with all these other issues getting in the mix, and just say it. And then we begin to create a wave of social acceptance and a social norm that supporting the Black community is actually normal. What a novel idea is that? That supporting people that we live next to and work with is okay. That's what we want to create as a normal thing. So, you know, you get to do that by utilizing your voice. So if we could go to the next slide. So all of that was like with your social media conversations. And it gets a little bit different when we're talking about people we have real friendships with and they're our family, we have real relationship. Please note that these points are not for how you interact on social media, because we all know that social media interaction can just turn into, people digging their heels in. So all you need to do is just put your voice out there and let that stand alone, okay? or you're not necessarily trying to change the opposition's mind on social media. You're just trying to let them know that you think differently, that your mind is different. And then you let other things do the work within their lives. So with friends and family, people who you actually have relationship with, here's what we're going to ask of you as a definition of allyship. And what does it look to be an ally in this fight? The first thing is you need to actively combat any deflection from the true movement. So what does that look like? What does that sound like? Well, what's a deflection from the movement? Well, you can look back at all the protests that were happening, and people say, well, those riots, they're just losing their message because, they're rioting and they're looting and they're burning down their own neighborhoods. How does that change anything? I hear you, friend, but that's not the reason. That's not what we should be focusing on. There's a man who died with a police officer kneeling on his neck. And this is not the first time that that specific event has happened. This is not the first time that a Black life was unjustly snuffed out by police officers. Injustice has been happening within that community for years. So I'm not interested in whether or not Target's insurance policy is big enough to cover the big screen TV that somebody stole. I'm really interested in hearing your heart about what do you think about how we can help solve the injustices in America. How do we do that? So when they try and bring something up that is aside from the movement, let's address all lives matter, right? Well, why is it Black lives matter? All lives matter. Friend, we know. But the reality is when we look at America today, it doesn't seem that Black lives actually matter. And in fact, there was literally a time in the United States of America where Black lives were only 5/8 of a life. Do you understand that, friend? Can we start that conversation? Because there's never been a question in America if lives matter in general. But there is real question, even constitutionally acknowledged question about whether Black lives are actually even lives. And we're still dealing with that trauma today, friend. Let's look at what's happening around the country. Why does this keep happening? People say, well, why do Black people always make such a big deal out of it? I mean, police, they're mostly good people, and these deaths they're 1%. And we die too. Yeah, you do. So like Thomas said earlier, if we solve that problem, we'll solve our problems as well. So why don't we join this movement that is willing to take risks to change the system? And hey, here's a gut check moment. Why doesn't that anger us the same way it angers them? If police are unjustly killing white people, why aren't you up in arms about it? Why aren't you protesting it? That's your fault. That's my fault. I've let it happen too long. And guess what? We're going to follow the Black community because the Black community has been doing this work for years and centuries and decades. And they're willing to stand up against the system because they know that the system wasn't built for them. And they know how to fight it. And if we as white people are just going to, and non-Black people are just going to let it slide, then that's our fault. Let's not blame them for actually trying to make the world a better place. Let's not blame them for actually trying to hold America to her promise of freedom and justice for all. So if we improve Black lives, it will improve all lives. And no, we don't need to focus on all lives mattering right now because all houses aren't burning. You guys have all seen the illustration, right? All houses aren't burning. One house is on fire. We put the water on the house that's on fire. We don't put water on all the houses because they don't all need it. So, what I want to say is you need to actively deflect actively combat those deflections from the true movement when you're talking with your friends. If we can go to the next slide. So here are some methods of successful interaction. How do we do it? How do we engage in these conversations with folks? A couple of things that I'd like you to take away. Actually, before I go to this slide, there are a couple other points that I'm seeing here on my notes that aren't on the PowerPoint. So when you talk about your friends and going back to friends and family conversation, for those of you who have Black friends and maybe even Black family, whether that's by marriage or by blood, one of the things that you can do is pick up the phone, call them and say, listen, I'm sorry, I haven't heard from you, and I haven't heard from other people like you. I haven't listened when I have heard. And I'm gonna engage in a process of learning. I'm sorry for ignoring your issues in the past. And just leave it at that. That may be all you get. And in fact, some of them might get really angry and just blow up on you. And they may light you up for 2 or 3 past conversations that you had and ways that you stood at that time. And that's just part of this process of healing, because they're hurting and they're angry, and you finally poked that wound and they're ready to explode. Some of them may say, I don't want to hear it from you. I don't want to hear another word out your mouth about this. This is my problem, not yours. That's okay if they feel that way. You just got to let them heal. They're not ready to advance the relationship. You're making this decision to move forward and you hope that in time it will restore. But one of the things that you need to understand is restoration takes time. And just because you've all of a sudden had a light bulb moment and you see your relationship with them differently, doesn't mean they're going to see their relationship with you differently just yet. And what is likely to happen with that individual is they're going to watch you from afar for a month, 2 months, a year, to see how long are they going to stay on this trip, or is this just them jumping in to have a feel-good moment for themselves, like, hey, I reached out to my Black friend and I made it all good. I said I'm sorry. Well, let me see what your posting looks like as we get a little bit closer to this election. Let me see what your posting looks like when something else happens. Or are you just going to continue being the same you that I've seen for the last 10, 12, 15 years, whatever the length of relationship may be? So just because you're ready to change doesn't mean the other person is ready to change, and you have to accept that. You have to be willing to do that. So the last thing I'll say in people that you have real relationships with, when you find any sort of veiled racism in their comments or their actions, rip it off, call it out, take no prisoners. I, in my business, network with quite a few people, and had somebody who has joined our allyship send me a message like, man, I can't believe what so-and-so said. And they were just venting to me. They wanted some thoughts on how this interaction went. And the individual basically was, the language and the emphasis of everything they said was more about, again, the looting and the rioting than the reality of what's happening to Black people in this country. Even when it was brought up, it's like, yeah, that's true, but they shouldn't do this and they shouldn't do that. And so what I did, because I have a business relationship with this individual as well, I direct messaged him, because I don't have his phone number. I direct messaged him and said, I saw your interaction on Facebook with our mutual friend. I'm hurt that you are more concerned with the destruction of property and things than the elimination of Black lives in this country. Left it alone. I've said everything I need to say to him, because he is who he is. That's not going to, I'm not going to change that. But I let him know that that is unacceptable. And he recognizes, because we have a business relationship, that that's going to impact that. And there are other people who that will impact. So when you see any sort of veiled racism through those things, you directly call it out. Don't let it stand. Don't let the joke stand. Don't let the statement stand. You say, hey, it's not right. I'm hurt that you would think of my friends, my family that way. I'm hurt that you would think of another American that way, another human for that matter, because this isn't even about nationalism. That's not what we are about. So now we can go forward to methods of successful interaction. So when we're having these conversations, the first thing you want to do is seek first to understand. And this is critical. And in fact, if we could do this in all of our interactions and relationships, whether this is your marriage, your boss, your colleague, the person you're trying to make a sale to, or whatever it is, seek first to understand. Here's what I've learned. I've been working in this arena, not nearly as actively as Thomas, but more socially. I've been having these types of conversation for about 5 years, very intentionally, reaching out to people who I knew stood opposed to my ideas. But I knew they accepted me as a person. And so it was very odd to me. And I would ask them, hey, what's going on? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? What do you think about social injustice? What do you think about police brutality? What do you think about, the Black community? And what I learned from these conversations is that just about everybody wants the same thing. And that's the elimination of racism as an institution within America. There's two primary places where we differ. Number one is the progress that we've made. And number two is the methods used to resolve the remaining issues. So by and large, the community that opposes the movement to move the Black community forward says, hey, at this point, we've leveled the playing field. We've made everything. We've even given them affirmative action. And at this point, if they're not succeeding, it's because of their own choices and laziness and and so they think enough progress has been made. Well, they don't understand that there is an exception to slavery, to the abolition of slavery that exists today. There is institutional racism in every aspect of our journeys. There are still things that are cascading down from the times where Black people were not allowed into certain government programs as well as social programs. All of these things still matter today, and there's still an impact. So the progress isn't as much as what they believe it to be. And the second thing is they disagree on the methods of how we make change. They want any remaining change to be almost unnoticeable. So you have to understand where they're at and don't jump to the fact that, hey, you're a racist because 1, 2, and 3. Understand where they're at. Understand how they think. And make sure you know what they think before you reply to them. When they say something that catches you, like, oh my gosh, I'm angry, I'm ready to fight on that particular statement, you take a step back and say, hey, help me understand. You said all of these thugs need to 1, 2, and 3. What do you mean when you say that? Who are you referring to? And you make them defend their own comments and their own statements before you go into a conversation with them. It'll do one of two things. It'll cause them to check themselves and recognize who they were calling thugs and who they don't call thugs and all of that. And the other thing that it'll do is it will, if they don't check themselves, it's going to give you all the equipment that you need to check them, because they're going to show all of their true feelings of how they feel about the Black community. And now you're gonna understand that, yes, they are exactly who you thought they were, and you have all the ammunition you need to call them out. The second thing is to remember that incremental change is okay. When you're having an interaction with somebody in this regard, know that they may not have an epiphany moment. Many of you did not have an epiphany moment. You incrementally began to understand more and more of the suffering of the Black community and have come to a point where you decided enough is enough. I need to do something. So if you just help them maybe question their assumptions, you've had a successful interaction. If you help them to begin to see that, wow, the Black community is a really hardworking community. They have the same number of household or the same amount of full-time employment as most households across the country. They're just employed in places at lower paying jobs. Let's see why that is. Maybe it has something to do with education and how our education system is funded, which is tied to housing, which is tied to redlining. We'll unpack all of that later. But you can help change a small thing in their mind that's going to be the seed that turns into 2-3 years down the road, them being willing to say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I unjustly, just wrote people off. So what I want you to understand is you're not going to flip people just from one gotcha statement. And then the last thing, this is a great strategy that I learned from Thomas, and this is probably one of his attorney techniques, is it's okay to give them their argument. Sometimes we want to win the battle, but we forsake the true mission of what we're going after. So like we said earlier with the All Lives Matter, and the fact that, hey, there are more white people that are killed by cops than black people. Okay, well, shouldn't that make you upset? Isn't that a problem for you? Why does it matter? What we're talking about is social reform. And again, we're not just looking at the police issue, but that's an easy illustration to understand this point. When someone wants to make a statement, oftentimes you can just say, you're right. So what do we do to change the system? Because that's not okay. Or whatever that argument is, just be willing to think about it a little bit differently. And the last thing I would say is, you got to understand that in most arguments, people will say this or that. It's either, they're lazy and the system is good, or it's absolutely rigged against them and there's nothing that they can do. Well, maybe there's a third way. Maybe there's a different option that we just need to continue. We need to pick up the ball from where Dr. King, had his life taken, and the movement kind of died with that original civil rights movement. Maybe we just need to move the ball forward, and that's how we should handle this. So with that, I'll pass it off to Thomas for you to go over some of the specific policy changes and things and actions that we'll be doing going forward.
Yeah, sure. So, and a couple of things I want to add to the social piece is just remember, well, two things. First, if you are white, you are probably going to hear generalizations, okay? All white people are racist, etc. If you're an ally, then that also entails kind of being the bigger person when it comes to communication. Okay, understand that people are communicating from a position of hurt, and there's not a lot of nuance in hurt. So if you are offended by people calling you racist and you're not racist, understand that that's nothing personal. It's their understanding of the issue at that point. And your job may not be to have them understand that you're not racist, and that takes up your approach. Okay, so you might have to accept being called a racist and not be racist, but exercise empathy in the fact that people are hurting and we're communicating out of hurt. All right. And if you're an ally, then you're willing to accept that on the chin. The other thing is, make sure you're elevating minority spaces in your space. Okay. So if you are a leader somewhere or something like that, it might not be for you to speak. It might be for somebody else to share their narrative. So don't feel compelled to be the representative of the group because you're an ally. A real ally would give up that space for somebody to share their own narrative rather than speaking on that person's behalf. So just two things I want to add to that.
Thomas, can I piggyback just on that as we kind of interplay here? I would agree, certainly. Don't speak for the community because that's not your place. But for those of you who are leaders in organizations, I can speak personally from my leadership at Prudential, and the CEO wrote a letter, and it was so empowering and so comforting for me as a Black person to hear a very powerful, and this is just the fact, old rich white man say, I don't know what to do here. I'm vulnerable and confused. I think were his exact words. And that told me so much about where his heart really is, that he is seeking to find what to do to help our community, because he thought he was doing enough and he realizes he's not. As I unpack the rest of his statement that he made just to employees, that's not a public statement that you'll find, but it was just so powerful for us. So you can speak for your organization and where you stand, and we all have seen many organizations say we stand completely against racism and all that. Just don't speak for the community, and that's where you bring in Thomas, myself, other Black leaders to speak for us on what we want to see done and how we can help resolve some of that confusion. So I just wanted to make sure those 2 points didn't get mixed up.
Well, and make sure that you are elevating the Black voices. Don't bring in Jason and me to speak on behalf of Black folks if you have Black people in your organization to speak up for themselves. The point is empowerment. So the direct action strategy of Dr. King's strategy has 4 different elements, okay? The first is a collection of facts. This is your better understanding the issue, all right? And I'm giving you this strategy. If you're in East San Gabriel Valley, I'm following this strategy. If you're a part of Operation Ally and you are helping with the advocacy that we're doing, then you are engaged in a direct action campaign, as that is the approach that we are taking. I don't believe in jumping into things just because I feel upset about them or I'm emotional about them. Okay, I'm an attorney. I make sure that my strategy is calculated and I make sure that my approach is informed. So the first thing we need to do is understand what injustices actually exist. Okay, and that is where I think we're getting a little bit mixed up in all of this being just a police issue. If you do the research, then it's not just a police issue. The police issue is a symptom of a much bigger issue, and that has a lot to do with economics, okay? The reason why I say poor Black individuals and poor white individuals really have a lot more in common than we have not in common, okay? So if you understand the facts, then you understand the police issue is not the only part of the issue, because if that were the case, then just get rid of the police and all the issues would be fixed. And that's not the case, okay? So understanding the facts, and I'm gonna go through a series of slides that are gonna talk about various areas that you would get this information from, okay? It's a lot, don't be overwhelmed. Again, we're gonna tease out each of these areas in the coming weeks, and I'm gonna be walking you through data collection and getting the information to move your advocacy forward. But don't do anything without collecting the facts and understanding the issues at play. Then you would negotiate. After you get the facts and you develop your platform, you take that to power and you negotiate that platform. What is it that we can get done? What is it that we can't get done? Obviously, you need to give some, get some, all right? So we cover this. And right now, actually, this is a great time to be negotiating. If you're in Laverne, I've literally had conversations with 4 out of our 5 council members, and all of them want to see change. Okay, so what that change looks like is going to differ between me and them, and probably differ between them. Okay, so our goal is to try and figure out a way for the community to come together with some reforms that'll work for everyone. And of course, some folks are going to have to give, particularly those who are currently enjoying unearned privilege. Then you go through a period of self-purification. If the negotiations break down and no change occurs, you have to be prepared to engage in a nonviolent campaign. Okay, and a nonviolent campaign is different from a peaceful campaign, all right? Peace is the absence of disturbance. It literally means tranquility. If you are at a point where you are able to peacefully protest, right? Go outside, have a silent protest on the corner of the street, and the mayor's gonna look at it, see you and feel bad for you and wanna make changes, then that makes peaceful protest effective, okay? There's a difference between peaceful protests and nonviolent protests. Peaceful, nonviolent protests are meant to disrupt. right? This is us marching down the street, yelling Black Lives Matter. It's really hard to watch TV when you got folks outside yelling at you, okay? It's really hard to enjoy your morning coffee when folks are coming by the pancake shop yelling things, right? That disturbance disrupts your peace, and that makes you want to make change, okay? That is different from us saying, let's go out and blow up that particular pancake shop, all right? So self-purification is a process where we're not going to engage in violence. And in order to engage in a protest that is strong enough, but not to succumb to the violence, you have to put yourself in a position of empathy. You have to put yourself in a position of compassion, not only for yourself and those who are hurting, but also for the oppressors and the people that you're trying to reach. And so that self-purification means that I'm going to have to probably take some things that I'm not comfortable with, and I'm going to have to respond in a way that I'm not comfortable with. And in Dr. King's day, it looked like having you sit at a counter with people dumping milk over you and you not respond violently. Okay, that will probably look different in status quo. Right now, it's just a much more aggressive tactic. You might have to take a rubber bullet or something, whatever. And then finally is the direct action campaign itself. What do you do when change is not happening? Take over city council, whatever it is, that is your actually disruption of the system so that the system bends to what it is, the reforms that you're trying to make. And what we don't want to get into a situation of is Americans, we generally have short attention spans. We grow fatigued very quickly. And I can tell you right now, 90% of us are already thinking on the other side of this protest, how do we make it stop? Okay, so direct action is to slow that process down and say, hey, unless something happens, we're not going to get back to normal, okay? And that's kind of where we are now. But I think we might have skipped some steps in these. And that's where this movement is, this allyship movement is kind of taking form, where we want to take a step back, collect the data. We have the facts, actually, we have the information. Now let's develop a platform, negotiate that platform, and see what we can do to get it passed. So potential policy areas that we talk about: policing, okay, parks and recreation, education, food access, homelessness, and mental health, okay? These things right here impact lives on a systemic level, okay? And if you stop short of all of these, then that means you're only putting a Band-Aid over the bullet wound, so to speak, okay? It is no good to give somebody free access to healthcare if they have absolutely no way to get to the doctor, okay? So that means you have to take more of a comprehensive approach to the change that you're trying to make if you actually want to make real change on this issue. And that's why I believe in coalition building, which we'll talk about. And that's some of the work that I got from Dr. Meek, is that collaborative governance approach. How do we all come together? Maybe my expertise is in food access. I don't need to be an expert in policing, okay? I only need to give my portion of food access or whatever. And we bring together our resources and our efforts, and then that's gonna bring about much more lasting change. So policing, and again, I'm gonna kind of go through a few bullet points here. You don't have to get all of them now. We're going to be digesting this stuff week by week as we dive into it. I will be talking about different policies, how different agencies approach these policies, and different issues that might be confronted in them. But the first is training. What type of diversity, inclusivity training is the officer getting, the beat officer? The other issue is that a lot of officers start out in the jails, okay? And then they go out in the street, or they start out in the worst communities and then they go to the best communities. That means literally police officers are starting their jobs out in fear, right? They're literally working with the absolute worst people in their community, and then you're sending them to police the best or worst people, so to speak, those who have been convicted or who are working through the jail system, compared to those who are not, right? And those attitudes that they form about the community don't stop, okay? So how are they training? Where are we starting them? It's probably appropriate to have unarmed service first. That way you're starting to get it to understand the community that you're serving, rather than getting in with the intent of policing them with force. What is the complaint process and how many have officers getting, and what is the actual repercussion? One thing we found with the George Floyd case is Derek Chauvin had a number of complaints against him, right? If we say, okay, enough is enough at this particular point, George Floyd is still alive. Okay, so how much are we allowing police officers to get away with before we actually do something about it? What is the use of force policy, the continuum of force policy? Most, especially in California, many departments have a use of force policy and they have to report. Do you understand that use of force policy? Do the communities that you're advocating on behalf of understand that policy? Why do people feel compelled to fight in the street as opposed to in the courtroom? Community-oriented policing strategies. Is the police involving the community in the community policing issues? Public safety is a community problem, not a police problem. Okay, so when you talk about homelessness, mental health, all of that stuff, the police can't answer that. It's going to take the community to come up with solutions for that. So the community has to be involved in the policing strategies. How are we approaching individuals without homes? We need to probably change our labels, stop calling them homeless. Let's emphasize their individuality, their personhood first, right? These are persons without homes, okay? Same thing with the mentally ill. These are persons without full mental capacity. Okay, if we start to reshift the way that we're thinking and seeing the issue, then we are probably better to come up with more community-based solutions rather than slapping labels and prescriptions based on those labels. But is your police having this conversation? Do they see them as persons first or problems first? And how are they approaching that problem, so to speak, without that recognition of their personhood? What is the pullover procedures? One of the things I get complained about a lot are Black drivers, particularly people in poor looking vehicles, being asked, are you on parole? Are you on probation? And that question comes from out of nowhere. Okay, so they feel isolated, they feel prejudged, and that doesn't de-escalate the tension between them and the officer. So this is probably an education thing. I talked to a Laverne officer about this. He said, well, we follow standard questions. It's been okayed by the Supreme Court, so we go based on what's been okayed by the Supreme Court. That's okay, but your department can have a policy that that changes this. Okay, you don't have to go based on what the Supreme Court says. And if this is a important question, then maybe we need to educate the community not to answer it because they don't have to. Okay, education. And then which nonviolent, non-property crimes result in the greatest police contact? Jaywalking is one of my favorite examples. Michael Brown may still be here if there were no jaywalking laws. Okay, that entire issue started with the cop giving him a hard time about jaywalking. Okay, so you'll probably have a lot of police contact that is absolutely unnecessary. Who hires a police chief? Who do they answer to? Is it the city manager? Is it the city council? And then what are the demographics of police activity? Are minorities receiving greater attention from the police? And if so, why? Park and recreation. Again, we're gonna go through these in turn so you don't have to feel like you have to take all this stuff in. I just wanna give you an overview that this is gonna be much more comprehensive than just asking, how do we get the no way 8 passed in my police department and then I can get back to work, all right? That's not what this is. How much of the budget goes to public safety? How much of it goes to park and recreation? Most cities' budgets are more than 50% go to public safety. Heck, the federal government gives most of its budget to the military. Like the police state is heavily funded in the United States at all levels. How much of the budget goes to community service? What are the administrative costs? What is the education system like? Are there disparities, racial disparities, economic disparities in the education system? What community programs are offered? Okay, are those community programs offered inclusive? Are they diverse? And are they safe? One of the things I have a real hard time, and I'm gonna, if you're in the Laverne area, I wanna have you check yourself on this. I attend a lot of community meetings, and the minute something comes up about a hip hop show or mariachi or something like that, eyebrows raised. Oh, okay, what are the police gonna be involved? What type of safeguards are you gonna put in for safety? That is prejudice, okay? If you're not creating an open and inclusive space, then again, you have to check whether or not you're an actual ally on this. All right. Hip hop in and of itself, I love hip hop, but I have no intention whatsoever of robbing you. Okay. Don't come robbing me either, please. What green space is available for folks for recreation? Where do the minorities live? And is there a difference? Because we see that school disparities and educational disparities are often linked to a lack of tax funding because of redlining that have previously kept Black individuals out of wealthier neighborhoods. Okay, so poor neighborhoods have poor educational performance, and they have disproportionately high minority populations. And that's even in the East San Gabriel Valley. Okay, and what healthcare services are available? We're going to talk about city politics. Who is the mayor? Who are the council members? If the city is divided into districts like West Covina is, then who represent, and Pomona, who represents what district? In Laverne, we don't have districts. Okay. Who is the city manager? What do these people do? You want to understand these people because this is how you best use influencers. This is how you best empathize and show compassion to them. Who is on the school board? Who's on the planning commission? Who's running the Chamber of Commerce? What nonprofits have missions devoted to social equity? And who's the school superintendent? The reason why you want to ask yourself these questions, again, this goes back to the collaborative governance. Who do I need to bring in to have what conversations to make change where? I went on it was about 3 years, Truth and Reconciliation program, where I engaged every police department in East San Gabriel Valley, including the California Highway Patrol, 9 agencies. I got to learn everything about, well, as much as I could. And then I started to propose policies. Come to find out, they can't make that policy change. They need the district attorney. They can't make that policy change. They need the city manager's approval. They can't make that policy change. They need the courts involved. You have to take a collaborative approach to change. You cannot work in silos, and you can't take this piece by piece. It needs to be a collective thing, which is why we're glad to have the support that we have from our allies, because we're all going to need to divide this up in some way and then approach it from our own individual strains. The socioeconomic issues. What are the demographics of the city? What is the minimum wage of the city or county? The graduation rates of the local high schools. And you want to understand if there are any differences or disparities based on race. Okay, you have to understand how the social economy is working in your community. What are the school discipline rates? And if there are any disparities based on race there. How are you defining special education? Are there race disparities there? If you have more minorities in special education program, why is that? How are you defining it? And are there social issues related to your classifying them as special education? I'm not an education expert, but I can tell you there are. Diversity of teachers. Are students seeing themselves represented in the educators that are providing them their education as role models? And then the quality of food that students are being provided. If you understand the systemic issue, there's a principle called the social determinants of health. Okay, racism, classism, gender, age discrimination, income, and education. These are all ways in which individuals are discriminated against, and that discrimination actually leads to poor health outcomes. That's why minorities, elderly, less education, less income, all have worse health outcomes, okay? And that tracks along with the police killing. So if you're talking about Black Lives Matter, we're talking about the social determinants of health and impacting that across the board. And that's how we capture poor whites. That's how we capture poor Latinos, poor Asians, poor Middle Easterns, poor everybody else, because we're now addressing the social determinants of health, which is a broader scope of discrimination and prejudice, and how that discrimination and prejudice work its way into basically lower life expectancy, literally. And I'm going to throw this out as a fact. Hopefully it helps. But the earned income tax credit, right? Every year we file our taxes, and if you have kids, you get a little bit of bump let up in your tax revenue or your tax refund. This one time per year tax cash infusion leads to a significant drop in infant mortality. Like when we talk about black babies dying, you're talking about saving 30 to 40% of black babies from dying in that area, in that time span where people are getting that earned income credit. When we talk about income, there's a direct link to our health outcomes. Race, direct link, right? So this is why we're taking a much broader approach to this rather than a smaller approach. So the action items that we're going to be talking about: reach out to local organizations that combat these issues that are based in identity politics. You're going to establish a coalition that addresses the social determinants of health, that broader policy area that we're talking about. And then you're going to formalize the coalition based on bylaws, vision, and strategic plan. This is the stuff you're engaged with now if you are local and you're a part of the coalition that we're building. This is the format that the approach that we're using. If you're not local, this is an approach that you could be using in your community. And then you want to make sure your coalition is diverse, well represented. You develop a platform, you'll assign particular leaders to negotiate that platform with local leadership. And then if there's no movement, then that's when you would advance on in the direct action campaign. So I've talked about getting your facts, doing your research, getting all of your information laid out, spelled out. Then you define the problem. What is the issue? You develop a platform around that problem / issues, and then you negotiate that platform with local leadership. All right. I'm going to stop there as far as the direct action campaign, because I know I've already thrown a bunch at you. Again, you don't have to worry about having all this stuff down. This is the stuff that I'm going to be mostly focusing on in the future, right? How do we address policing? How do we address social economics? How do we address education, et cetera, from a policy perspective and advocacy perspective? Here's some strategies that you can use to engage your local leadership, all right? First, seek understanding of the facts, all right? Don't go in with assumptions. So when you talk about where do I get the information that you talked about, most of the time you're gonna get this information from meetings if you're not gonna do your research, okay? The policing information, I got a lot of that information from literally sitting down with about a couple dozen police chiefs, and I narrowed that list from all of the issues that the community reported to me, as well as my meetings. Okay, but I went in not assuming anything, but only asking questions. If you go in asking questions, then they're gonna wanna ask you questions back, all right? So don't go in making demands, making statements, you need to do this. Here's this no wait 8 that I want you to pass right now. No, go in and say, hey, here's a no wait 8 campaign. What are your thoughts on this? What are we doing? What are some complications that we're gonna have doing this? What are we not doing and why can't we do it, right? Just ask questions first. Be empathetic. Understand leadership is a hard job, incredibly hard, all right? So put yourself in their shoes and negotiate from that perspective. I think it'll end up in mutual respect. Be consistent and persistent. Even though you're being empathetic, make sure you're also constantly keeping the conversation moving forward. Don't let the can get kicked down the road. Make sure movement is actually being made. Speak truth to power. Don't lose your credibility. Leaders know if you are engaged or not with the community based on the things that you're saying. Okay, if you come in and you're too congratulatory of their work, you're praising, and you don't actually get to the critical issues, they know that you're not actually representing the community. Have your credibility intact. The community also knows if you're not speaking truth to power, then you're not speaking the truth. You are not a representative. So make sure that you're always willing to have tough conversations. Use influencers. This is why you want to know the people that are around the decision makers. You might not be able to change the mayor's decision, but you go to church with his mom, okay? And if the mayor has a relationship with his mom like I have with my mom, then leaning on my mom is going to be more effective than leaning on me. Okay, so lean on the people around the decision makers and work your influence that way. If it's not working directly, take a broad approach. That's why I talk about collaboration and coalition building, and then get it done, whatever it takes. Be the bigger person, keep it moving. Maybe it takes hurt feelings. Maybe it takes hard conversations. Maybe it takes you putting yourself out there and being vulnerable in ways that you're not comfortable. Be willing to go there in order to get it done. here are some things that you can do before our meeting next week. We are having our next meeting on Thursday. Okay, and I think that one is going to be juicy, 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 because we are definitely starting to get into some problems. We were starting to get into some policies. Yeah, I see you, Jen. Yeah, it's it's going to be a good meeting. Okay, so what I want you to do to kind of lay the foundation for that meeting is find our Facebook page. Make sure you are liking or following our Facebook page. Join the Operation Ally Facebook group. Okay, we definitely need to hear your voice there. We sent out a bunch of materials there, and we talk about a lot of different policies there. Okay, so that's a good group to be a part of. Watch the documentary 13, and quite honestly, if you have time, watch Just Mercy as well. I just watched that last night, and quite honestly, it's changed my world. I cried so much that I like got so much perspective. I feel like I got a purpose now, right? So when I start to watch these movies, yeah.
You had not watched Just Mercy?
I cannot. I usually try to stay away from legal movies because as a Black attorney who have direct experience with the injustices in the system, watching it in the movie just connects too much with the burden that I have to take on in real life.
Gotcha. That's why you didn't understand the reference I made last week.
Yeah, no, I try and stay away from them, but then I was like, I have to watch this movie because I have to be able to, use cinema and movies and stuff like that to get the message across. And so I watched it, and it did what I was afraid of it doing, like literally reminding me of the reality that I face every day as a criminal defense attorney. But it's good. It's really good. The other thing that I thought was startling about it is I thought the movie was like in the 60s or 70s. And then I look and 1993 pop up, like a year or two before the OJ trial. Like that is a recent movie. Okay, so having a better understanding of some of the nuances of literally how the court comes down on minorities is so important. And I think that movie does a great job of depicting that. Attend a local city council. Next week, we're meeting on Thursday. I believe Covina meets on the second Tuesday. West Covina, I believe maybe the second Wednesday. I'm not sure. So attend a city council meeting and then make a statement during public comment. Most of them are on Zoom. You have to send in an email. Ask your city council to denounce police brutality and affirm a rejection of racism. This will show you how connected your city council is to this issue and whether or not they're actually willing to make a statement on this, and whether or not they are potential allies or not in this. Develop a list of organizations you want to work with that are personally near and dear to your heart. And then I want you to do something. I want you to bring in your closest relatives, and I want you to have a conversation about some immediate changes that you can see. I'm going to give a shout out to my sister-in-law because based on everything that's been going on, her husband sat her kids down and they came up with a family reparations plan, right? What are they as a family going to be doing for the community around them to better repair the folks who've been hurting? I mean, that is just brilliant. All right. So I want you to figure out ways that you can have that conversation with the people around you. Because as Jason said, you have access to folks that we don't have access to, and you have a way of speaking to them that we don't have a way of speaking to them. But what I am going to also ask, I'm going to ask that it's time for us to stop attacking. Okay. Yes, people were late to the show. Yes, people are still saying all lives matter. Yes, people are incredibly ignorant on the issue. Attacking them is not going to bring them over. Okay, so agape love, that I try and run my life on the principle of agape love. And agape love means that you recognize the redemptive goodwill of all men. Okay, so even that KKK person, why is that person racist? What has hurt them? What has led to them to have such a hate for another human being that they're willing to go this far? Okay, and be willing to give that person the space to feel comfortable for you to bring them over. All right. You can best do this because you love them. They love you. All right. But I think it's time for us to, it's time for us to be critical. Okay. And they're going to get the critical, they're going to get the attacks. They're going to get all that on their social media, but they need a safe space where they can be educated on why those attacks are happening. So be that safe space if it's appropriate. If it's not appropriate, do what is best, but have these conversations with the people you love and who love you. And let's move the issue forward. These are some examples of some platform suggestions that we're going to be discussing. These are to just get the conversation started, to get us revisioning where we're going as a community. We saw that Minneapolis today are talking about scrapping their police department. What is that going to look like on the other end, right? So we need a plan. We need to be thinking about policies, but we also need to be thinking about the implementation of those policies and what some potential negative outcomes from those policies can be. And that only happens when you get the community together and you're starting to hash out problems and issues and potential solutions. So that's that. I'm going to stop there. And then we'll get into any questions folks might have. Again, this was an overview of some of the policy approaches that we're going to be taking. We've gotten the ULV debate team. They literally have mapped out all of the city council and school board meetings in East San Gabriel Valley, Pomona Valley, and Inland Empire. We're going to create Facebook event pages so people know when those are and they can engage in those. We're going to try and make your advocacy as easy and as comprehensive as possible, meaning we're going to have the templates for you. We're going to work to give you all the tools that you need to make the collective change that we want to see done. That being said, we'll open it up to any questions.
Thomas, before we jump to questions, one thing that I also want to add is, in social media, one thing that we find is people often end up in silos, right? Where you go to this group and we can speak our language to ourselves and we get to beat our chest and say, oh, well, I found this cool meme and look at how silly these people look and look at how dumb I made this guy look. That's not the intention of this group. This group is not about creating a silo. It's about providing you a megaphone. It's about helping to amplify the voices within the Black community that are calling out for change and helping to amplify the voices of Black leaders that are leading the way towards having true systemic change to all of the things that we see going on. So if you're just looking for another group where you can be patted on the back and told that everything you're doing is good, that's not this group. This group is a place to continue to challenge you and continue to ask you to walk forward with us, because there is a tremendous amount of work to be done. Have we made progress from where we were pre Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? Yes. Did he get all the way done? Not at all. His dream is not realized. And it is our job to be the ones who help to fulfill on that dream. And we're going to continue to challenge and grow and amplify voices. So don't think of this as a silo, it's a megaphone. What questions we got?
Yeah, and I'm going to clarify because somebody wanted me to get into my contextualization of the worst communities. When I say worst communities, I mean the communities that have the worst social outcomes, i.e. greater poverty, lack of food access, lack of economic resources. And if you watch or read the guy's name is escaping me now, but the book Well talks about the fact that zip codes are the greatest indicator of health and crime. Okay, so we know where poverty is. We know where crime is because they were redlined and it was constructed that way. So my contextualization of the worst communities deal with the social economy and how those social economies result in negative social outcomes. Any other questions? All right. I know we did have a question earlier regarding the mental health approach, okay, that is an issue that, again, there's a theory called police centrism. And what that means is we think that everything is a police problem. Okay, there's a crazy guy dancing out in front of my yard. What is he doing here? I'm gonna call 911. Okay, everything is a public safety police issue. In mental health, I think that we should unpackage that and understand that it's not a police issue. Most of the time, police don't have the depth of understanding and the depth of training. They just don't have the time to get that type of training. So when you talk about who's dealing with the mentally ill, I think that it should be folks who are actually trained with dealing with the mentally ill. We're in Laverne. I'm in Laverne. So we have Tri-City, we have East Valley Community Health Center. We have a number of different nonprofits in the area that deal with mental health. What I would like to see is our police departments collaborating with those people and having those people send folks out to mental health calls that don't create an immediate public health issue, or have those people go with the police. But and we are already starting to see this trend in East San Gabriel Valley. It's just very slow. Okay, so when we talk about budget reallocation and stuff like that, I'm talking about getting more and more of those type of collaborations involved, where the police are not the front lines of every single issue, such as substance abuse, homelessness, and I have one more, but it escaped me. City committees are a good tool. In fact, in Laverne, we're working now to establish the Committee on Cultural Diversity and Social Inclusivity. And the purpose of that committee, actually, I've been working this weekend on creating a website where people are going to be able to go in and post, report any discrimination or prejudice that they experience in Laverne. And the committee is going to work with hopefully the Chamber of Commerce, the school board, the city, the police, and all the major institutions, the university, to try and be a bridge between that person who had that experience and the power that created whatever harm that they need addressed. So don't be afraid of engaging your city community committee. Somebody put in the Youth and Family Action Committee. We plan to work with them because that is our youth. As I understand it, the police are engaged. We don't want to create anything unnecessary. We want to work with the people who are already doing the work. Okay, so I'm going to be making a presentation at the East San Gabriel Valley Consortium on Homelessness. Okay, we've already talked about being a partner with them in this effort. The goal is to work with people who are already engaged, so we're not duplicating resources or duplicating efforts. We're bringing everybody in together for a concentrated effort moving forward. Any other questions?
While we're still taking questions, I just want to put a reminder as we're coming towards the end of our meeting. If you want to stay in contact, please drop your email within the chat function so that we have a ability to push information out to you. Join the Operation Ally group for us so that we can continue. That is on Facebook, Operation Ally, and also click on like for the Social Justice Advocacy Project as well. Operation Ally is kind of a wing of the social justice advocacy. I'd like to also promote two other things that are going on in this vein. The first is a event that the Social Justice Advocacy Group is co-sponsoring or co-hosting with some of our friends who invited us to speak. I'll be on a panel of 4 other Black individuals, and we're just going to have we're calling it an explicit conversation in the backyard. Just a conversation amongst Black individuals about Black issues. It's not going to be like this, where it's geared towards policy change and movement. It's really going to be, hey, how do Black people really feel about this? If we could just be in the backyard together and have our own conversation, what would it be like? And we're allowing the community as a whole to see that and and just hear how people feel in a real, raw, safe environment, because we want those voices to be out and amplified. So we've connected with Joshua and Jacob Spodek. They're allowing us to be a part of that. So you'll see that coming up. There's already some advertisement out on that. And then the other thing is look out for information on Juneteenth. Juneteenth is a celebration of Black liberation and Black freedom. We will be posting more about that in Operation Ally. And there are some events locally that are going to be happening to celebrate the announcement to the final slaves when they were freed back in Galveston, Texas. So that's a celebration that we want to, especially this year, put some energy behind and help magnify some positive things that go on in the Black community. It seems like we always rally around tragedy. Let's rally around some celebration for the Black community as well, that we, in the strength and the joy and the great things that exist within who we are and what we do. Other questions that may have come up, Thomas?
No more, but I will make a couple more announcements on tomorrow. If you're interested in understanding a little bit more of the George Floyd charges, the case, what does it mean that the 4 officers were arrested? What do the charges mean? I will be hosting a discussion with a public defender who actually practiced in the very county that the George Floyd case is in. And so he's going to be breaking down the case for us. Wednesday evening, we are going to be talking about movement building with Matt White, who's worked with union coordinating and training. Thursday, we're here again for our second meeting of Operation Ally. And then Saturday, the Social Justice Advocacy Project actually has a solidarity series where we are building bridges with all the different groups. Yesterday, it was about Black-Brown solidarity. This week it's called Black versus White in a Gray World, okay? We don't have to hate each other. And in fact, if we are going to come up with solutions, that's gonna require us to find love, okay? So this is gonna be talking about some of the commonalities that exist in the Black and white communities that might be overlooked, might not be fully accounted for, and why it works in both communities' interests to move forward together. We're gonna be doing this with the Asian community, the Middle Eastern community, and yes, even our police brothers and sisters, because we think that this issue is deeper and bigger than any one group, okay? And if we all come together with our planned solutions, if we truly care for justice, which we all claim to, then I think we all have a role in working together in this solidarity movement. So solidarity, solidarity, solidarity. I said that 3 times fast, can you? All right, that being said, it's 7:04. I think we've engaged with the questions that we've gotten.
No, how do we talk to you guys?
What do you mean, outside of this?
Can you get it? Am I coming through to you right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is Maury. Yeah, I don't know what I do. We just turn on our microphone and break in?
We can hear you. We've been monitoring the chat, sir, but we can hear you.
Okay, now the question is, there's a meeting Thursday.
Yes.
What time? I haven't seen, you mentioned it 3 times and we don't know what time it is.
It's at 5:30. So all of our meetings are planned for 5:30.
Okay, thank you.
And if you put your email in the link or in the chat, then you will be emailed the link and it will be posted to our Facebook.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
for your support, Maury.
All right, so if there's no other questions or comments, thank you guys so much for your attendance. We look forward to engaging with you in this work, right? The struggle is real and it continues. I love you from the bottom of my heart. You always have a friend in us.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. Appreciate you participating, hanging in there an extra 5 or so minutes here with us. You guys are the key to this really going. Thomas and I cannot do all this on our own. We don't have the strength or the energy. Just your presence gives us more energy in being able to do that. So thank you all for participating. Bring some folks back to Wednesday if you thought this was good. We should have a link. Oh, sorry, Thursday. Thank you. Bring some folks back to Thursday. we should have a link that you can actually forward this meeting to them so that they can kind of catch up on what's going on and then we'll keep the ball rolling. So I'm going to jump off and go plan the Juneteenth celebration. See you, man. I'll catch up with you later tonight, Thomas.
All right. Sounds good. Bye, everybody.